Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of SaaS Showdown. I'm Rose Layton.
And I am Colin McCarthy. Thank you for joining us for another great episode of SaaS Showdown. We have spoken about the history, how to choose a SaaS application. We recently spoke about, an overview of SaaS management, and then identity and access management, and the pros and cons of what you use for your identity. But then the next part of that list of areas to focus on, manage, secure, discover, is, I guess, let's tackle the discover part. And Rose, what do we have to consider for the discover part of our SaaS management and SaaS ops lifestyle?
Yeah, so every IT team is aware of some of our application stack, right? Usually the ones that we purchased or that
we would hope so. We would hope so because we have spent hours going over those enterprise agreements. They've been redlined by legal. They've been checked by finance.
Right. So we're always aware of anywhere from a couple to a dozen, maybe 20 applications, just by nature of transitioning from on-premise to SaaS tools. And so I think every IT team has at least what we call a core stack. And this is what they're aware of that exists in their organization. But in the past couple of years, several years, depending on how fast your organization moved, we've also seen the rise of SaaS shadow IT, right? SaaS applications that your users are using. Maybe they've paid for, maybe they're not, but they're using them to get their work done. And you may or may not have a hand in managing them.
Right. So I guess their adoption would have been we spoke a little while ago, one of the last episodes about Active Directory and how, that was the start of people's identity. And a lot of those companies were using Skype for Business or the Link server to do their video conferencing. People might have signed up their own personal Zoom accounts to start doing those videos. So that would be a good example of how shadow IT gets into your organization.
Well, and another good example, I think, in my experience is I have never done a Microsoft to Google migration where there weren't shadow IT Google accounts already in existence.
Right.
Because the users wanted to use Google or needed to use Google in some cases to collaborate with certain external partners. And so they created Google accounts, sometimes whole G Suites, sometimes whole Google workspaces that weren't managed by IT in order to get their work done.
Right. Yes. I've seen the huge, professionalization of those shadow IT services. They use the term freemium, where they would provide, free services to get X amount done. And then obviously you'd have to pay that premium amount to get additional things like Evernote, I think, was one of the big first freemium
it's a marketing strategy.
Yeah.
You get people to join up for the free accounts and then you get enough of them and enough of them. Well, eventually what's going to happen?
You have $1 billion business like Slack, or you get sold.
Or you get sold really good example.
Or you get sold for billions of dollars to Atlassian like Trello. Trello was a very good freemium model where they had
very common household names these days started as shadow IT in many organizations. Slack started as shadow IT in my organization.
Right.
Say for sure.
So there needs to be a way to manage them.
And there needs to be a way to find them.
Yes, and manage your existing corporate provisioned, paid for, licensed, official, supported, approved applications. And that's where we come into the emerging growing market of SaaS management, and then I'm going to say spend management in
I
air
call
quotes.
it SaaS spend management.
Because if you do a Google search there, if you do a Google search for SaaS management platforms, there's a long list of applications that say they can do SaaS management. But the management is mostly limited to onboarding, offboarding, and visibility into that spend and usability. So, and we'll get into later on. I think in a couple more weeks, we're going to talk about a more in-depth discussion about actual SaaS ops platforms and SaaS management platforms, and try and evaluate some of them to give some true indication. But to
be clear, Colin, today, what we're talking about is not SaaS management. We are talking about SaaS spend management.
Yes. So these kind of companies are the names like Blissfully, Tory, Intello, that are now part of SailPoint, Productive, Flexera, Xylo, and Snow Software, which was one I discovered about today.
I think you can take a pill for some of those, Colin.
I can. Yeah. My Xylo did flare up a few days ago, but a bit of an ointment, and it's not so bad.
Just a little dig at SaaS names. Sorry.
Yes, I'm thankfully I'm not in a marketing job trying to think up a new name for a SaaS application. We just had to come up with a name for a SaaS show. So management of shadow IT and these license management, spend management applications. Value is there?
Well, I think yes. My organization has one. We're not 100% happy with it, but we still want one, right? It's just that ours isn't doing everything we want it to do. And I think yes, for a couple of reasons. Number one, I have used a spreadsheet before to try to track all the software that we were aware of in our organization. And it doesn't even come close to scratching the surface of things that people can and might be using, right? The tricky part of these platforms for me is how much they can discover and how well they can process their data. So the first part, though, is all of these platforms have direct integrations.
Right.
And two types.
Into your what we spoke to before about your identity.
Your identity and access management.
See, it all links together. That's why you have to listen to all of these in order on repeat constantly.
Yeah. So one of the direct integrations these tools usually offer is your identity provider. Some of them offer multiple identity providers. Some of them even offer multiple instances of the same identity provider for large enterprises.
Right.
And they may also offer a host of smaller integrations for other core applications, like Zoom is a really common one. Slack is another really common one. Project management tools, sometimes Jira's and things like that.
Right. The Adobe's, some of the larger players where they might have an identity of their own, as opposed to some services might just provide a service, but then you would authenticate into that service using your Office 365 or your Google account.
Or ones that have pretty complex license management, right? Because Adobe has a lot of different licensing. And it can get pretty pricey when it's not being used.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And thankfully, the licensing model is a lot better than it was a number of years ago.
Well, that may be true, but
yes. Yeah. You should.
And then the other type of direct integration you'll see is finance software.
Right. And how does that work? What does it do? Does it interrogate, your Concur, your SAP, I'm trying to think of other SaaS.
Well, Concur is a very unpopular one, let me tell you. I've evaluated so many of these now. I pretty much can tell you who's going to be on the list of finance integrations. It's going to be your Xeros, your NetSuites, QuickBooks Online.
That was the one.
And then Sage Intacct.
Right.
It may not be all 4 of those, but it's going to be at least 1 or 2. And then the good ones also have a CSV upload option.
Right. So if you have the ability with your finance team to export a period of your financial records, you could import it into this platform for evaluation. What's the value of and the reason to have your financial application tied into these SaaS management, spend management applications?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. One, the sticker price is not always what you pay on these things. And so your finance data gives you a real look at what your company has paid for something.
Right.
And then the other part of it is it kind of brings finance and IT together in a way that I don't think is necessarily very common in enterprises or even mid-sized businesses.
Right.
And it helps IT to understand, what's going on in our environment, but it helps finance to understand what people are using and where the money is going. Right. IT tends to be one of the larger budgets in an organization.
Yes, yeah. And I guess it also would highlight anything that was being charged to a corporate credit card or charged and then expensed and potentially not being picked up by an audit or a review or an approval process.
Right.
Somebody
it can pick up something that, the marketing guy purchased a new project management tool, but he didn't run it through IT. And so it's not in our budget. But you can get it from the finance data or the expense data.
Right. But then, of course, IT would be responsible for any administrative problems or data leakage from that application. And also most organizations have a security audit process that you would want to go through. So, okay, so it can be a good tool to highlight any of those SaaS applications that have come into the organization through unofficial means. And sometimes I'm guessing that can be malicious or accidental, just ease of use.
Right. It's a little bit of both sometimes, depending on your IT's relationship to the company. Yeah.
If it's going to take 2 weeks to get a PO from finance and approval to use something, but you've got a corporate card or no, you can expense something. It's like, well, let's just sign up for Dropbox and start working today. So yeah. Okay.
And then the last, so 2 different types of direct integrations, both providing different things. Identity and access management providing OAuth, SSO, SAML kind of information, direct access to finance, providing literally this is what the company has paid for information. And then most of these apps also have a third category. So I call this like third party or extension discovery. And it happens in a couple of different ways, depending on the company. One of the common ones is a Chrome extension or a browser extension that monitors usage. So whenever you're logged into your corporate browser and you have this extension pushed by your administrator, it will monitor the usage. And it will monitor like when you're on, if you go to Trello.com, right? Or any of the various websites linked to Trello,
right?
It will monitor that as Trello usage.
Right. It's not actually screen capturing and spying on you. It's just trying to evaluate your usage of SaaS applications across your corporate day-to-day life. Okay.
And yeah, another version of that I've seen for not necessarily monitoring in the same way is it's an email integration where it scans emails for a list of known SaaS company domains.
Wow.
And pulls out invoices from those domains.
That's interesting. I would question that.
It's an interesting approach, right?
Yes, And
the third category tends to be a little bit unpopular, but
yes. It's interesting how you say it pulls out invoices because if you're using a freemium version of Trello or Dropbox or something to do your corporate business, then obviously you're not going to get an invoice, but you're going to get loads of notifications of files being sent and tasks being assigned to you. So interesting that. And I guess so. It's the integration for your access management. So you tie in your Microsoft account or your cloud identity or your Okta, and then however you authenticate into your other approved SaaS applications, it would be able to bring in usage reports because it would get those SAML tokens logged into their database. You would also be able to, I'm guessing you'd be able to see, depending on if it's got a rich integration or a direct integration, you could actually see, I guess, have more visibility into actual usage of something like how much time is somebody spending on Zoom,
right? Or how
Zoom
often are they logging in,
etc. Okay, and then I guess it's that Google OAuth which captures. It'd be interesting how it captures that and the insights you can get, because there's certainly I'm sure it can be done with the Microsoft side. I'm very much focused on the Google side as a Google Workspace person, but signing into EchoSign or DocuSign, it's not a corporate service, but you can just click the sign in with Google and you get
and it would count that, right? It would count that as a service.
Right.
But, those insights, I think if you're using it and you see a handful of people who are known to sign contracts with vendors or with clients are using DocuSign, but not very often, that kind of does trigger that, like, oh, I know you can sign into Google with that service. Yeah. So they must just be signing into Google. Does it mean that you shouldn't manage that? Like, I think that's going to kind of be up to you and the industry you're in and what your security policies are. But because you can store contracts in DocuSign,
right?
Everything you sign is stored.
Yes.
But the reason to discover all these applications is just exactly that, Colin, right? Like,
right.
The trail of data you leave behind.
This is the sprawl. It's that SaaS sprawl that I've heard of, and I know that obviously a lot of those times when you do the Google OAuth authentication, like if you want to use Zoom with your Google account, it says by adding Zoom, you're giving Zoom the ability to read and write to your calendar. So Zoom can publish your events to your calendar, and that's fine. Zoom as an application is only accessing your calendar, but for some other services that might be writing to your OneDrive account or your Google Drive account because they're doing some editing or OCR processing or something else.
Right, or it's a third-party plugin to do a certain thing or whatever it is.
I've seen that a lot of these applications will give you a score and allow you to sort of have visibility into the permissions that each one of these applications have on your Google accounts or your identity. I'm sorry, I've used the word Google account. Your identity, which would be something for the security team to look at and review.
Because some of these apps are a little bit, I would say, overeager in the permissions that they ask for. You see the same thing in, Slack bot integrations and things, right? Like sometimes the list of permission scopes is ginormous, even though like all this thing does is like post a GIF in the channel.
Yes. Yeah. I've in my role, I review and allow a lot of Google Market Space applications and other Google Workspace add-ons. So I'm very good at reading those lists. And so many of them will say, read your identity, read your email, read and write to something. And then it might say, access external services. And they're the ones to worry about because you have no clue what that external service is that you're giving your Google account access to, or that external account access to your Google account. I
think on the other side, Colin, the thing, like you're talking about these applications reading into like known corporate data.
Yeah.
The other half of that security problem is like, let's say your company uses Google Drive, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure it does. And somebody decides that they want a Dropbox account.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not sanctioned, but they go sign up for one anyway. And they start storing things in there and they start sharing things from there. If you don't know that that Dropbox account exists and that employee leaves, or God forbid, the account is compromised, all of the data that they've stored in there as over the course of their work is exposed. Is at risk.
Yeah, and also if it's a personal owned Dropbox account and not corporate managed, you can't enforce any of the security policies that you might, MFA and everything else. I have seen in some of these applications that we've looked at, it can be very useful for tracking down or being alerted and being aware if a third-party site or service is compromised. You can easily go through, see how many users might be impacted, or at least find the application if anybody has authenticated to it, and then revoke those authorization tokens. So any
I've been
additional...
very pleased to see the security additions added into these. Another example I can give you is a lot of these have a SaaS catalog of all the apps that they can track. And some of them have started adding whether or not an app has SOC 2 certification, ISO 27001 certification,
right?
Links to their GDPR policies, right? Like links to their CCPA policies.
Okay.
And having that as a database right at the tip of your fingers can be really helpful if you're a particularly compliance oriented organization.
Right. And so I guess that's the spend management part. It gives you, it's the license and spend is sort of contract management. You have all that security information. You can put in the renewal date, your license value, so that you can run some reports and be aware of things that are happening. All right, so the spend, the SaaS management spend applications have a valid place in the catalog of tools that a SaaS and SaaS Ops professional has to use and consider.
They definitely do. It's a saturated market because there's a lot of players in there. But
and I think
they always surface some valuable information, I think.
Yes, yeah. So there is, people choosing them would have to do their evaluations carefully, see what they wanted to go for. And some of them seem to be smaller companies that just do SaaS spend management. And then others are part of large organizations that do so much more.
Right.
So I guess it depends what other applications you might want from their catalog of services.
We were just on a demo not long ago, Colin. Where Freshservice was talking about their new application discovery tool, right, and management tool.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of people are kind of jumping into this idea that asset management or SaaS management isn't just about the things about, right? That we need to really be able to look deeply into our environments and understand what and how people are using.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It's all about those sort of three key words: the discover, which this is the manage part, which we've spoken about, that trying to choose your identity and the decisions about that, and then the secure part. And I know we'll talk about that in upcoming episodes. The secure part, all about the best practices for deprovision, securing applications, etc. So, well, this has been great. Very insightful.
Thanks for another good one.
Yeah, another episode of SaaS Showdown is in the can.
All right. See you next time.
Cheerio.
Produced by the Tab Geeks Network. Enjoy all of our shows on YouTube at youtube.com/tabgeeks. Join our exclusive, free, no sponsors allowed Slack community and sign up for our newsletter at tabgeeks.com.